Hey, it's Ben with SuperPumped Podcast, and I am excited to continue our series on turnover to figure out ways to solve your people problems so that you in turn solve your profit problems. And as we've talked about in this series, when you have high turnover or even modest turnover, it is just eating into your bottom line. And so this series is about how to take control of that and to proactively stop the turnover beast, slay the turnover beast, and keep the money that you've worked so hard in your business to earn. Today is the second part in what you can do before someone ever dons your uniform, before they're ever an official employee of your company. And last week I talked about how once you put out an ad or a call for new employees, that you want to hire someone within a 10-minute drive of that business. And that will incredibly elevate your likelihood of that person staying. Now, that isn't a solution just in and of itself. In terms of turnover, there are a number of things you need to put together, and it depends on your location and your industry and so forth. But I'm going to give you kind of a toolkit, and you can pick and choose which tool you think works. And a lot of these work in conjunction with one another. So the 10-minute rule was last week. Today, I want to talk about referral bonuses, because a lot of companies have these, but they don't necessarily either understand the mindset for why they're doing them, or they're not doing them in a way that makes them effective. And so I want to dig into why referral bonuses can be an incredibly important way to reduce your turnover. So the first thing that a recruiting bonus is going to do is something related more to your retention than the actual person you're recruiting. This is a tool to leverage your recruiting dollars to keep your current employees. Think about that for a minute. You have the opportunity when you're recruiting new hires, right, to hand that money to ZipRecruiter or to maybe a boosted post or on Indeed or, Monster, or whoever that platform is that you utilize, right? You give them dollars and they give you candidates. But if you take that money and you put it in your current employees through a referral bonus, that makes their bottom line better. That's something, this is a whole side episode, but the more money you put in your employees' pockets, the more likely they are to stay with your company, right? They want to make money. Everybody's there to make money. So you are actually leveraging those dollars to something you care about. You don't care whether Indeed or Monster or any of those make money, right? You care about whether your people make money. And the more money they make, the more likely they are to stay. So the first thing is you're leveraging those dollars. Now, here's the second thing. Compare and contrast someone who comes in off the street through an ad versus someone who is referred by a fellow employee, right? It's a huge difference because there is a pressure on both the person who does the referring as well as the referee for this relationship to work. My son was looking for summer employment, right? And so he said, "Dad, who do you know that might be looking for people?" And I said, "Well, let me think about that for a minute." And I came up with an idea of a guy that I thought, I know he's always looking for folks and it seems good. So anyway, I said to my son, I'd be open to referring you to this person that I know, my friend. He was like, "Yeah, I'd be interested." But before I did the referral, I said, "Okay, now I want to make sure you are going to do a good job for this guy. You're not going to flake, because the difference is if he's applying to Cane's or Chick-fil-A, some fast food summer job, right? And it doesn't feel like a fit, he's pretty likely going to bail fairly quickly, right? I hate working the fryer or whatever that thing is in that business. But if he's been referred by his dad or by a coworker to go to that job, he's much more likely to stick with that job because he doesn't want to embarrass me. It's the same way with your employees. Your employees have a vested interest if they recommend that their sister or their cousin or their, father-in-law work for your company. They're going to lean on that person to make sure that they are somebody that you think is going to stay. So there's a pressure to stay and to perform. And the way you put that in place is with these referral bonuses, that there's certain time lengths where it's paid out, not only to the referee, but also the referrer. So that's an important thing. Here's a really cool side benefit, third benefit to referral bonuses. I would call this the add-on trainer. Think about a lot of jobs you've had. You have an onboarding process, right? And so generally there's a trainer or someone assigned to you to kind of get you up to speed within that company. But oftentimes it's a fairly fast process. It might last a couple days or a couple weeks, whatever that timeline is. But then that person fades away. And so often, as soon as your trainer leaves and your onboarding process is complete, that's when you have all these questions, right? But a lot of us, and I've been in this boat, we're a little bit reticent to ask questions after the fact. Like we feel like, they're going to think I'm not too bright, I'm not picking this up, or they're going to think I didn't pay attention during the onboarding process. And so then you end up with these kind of unanswered questions, and it limits maybe your ability to get up to speed and be productive as fast as you could. But here's the cool thing about a referral bonus, right? You can go back to that person who referred you to the job. So maybe it's your sister or your, daughter-in-law, whoever that is. And you can say, hey, listen, I had a question about this. I don't quite recall how to do this or where I get the resources for this, maybe where the office supplies kept, whatever that thing is, or, what our production day is. So instead of having to go back to that trainer, they can informally go to the person who referred them and say, I need a little bit of clarification on this. And so you essentially have a second trainer. You have the official trainer or onboarder, right? But then you have the referral person who serves in a de facto training role. So that is a huge benefit. Think about it. You're getting an extra trainer for free because you did this referral thing. The fourth thing that's really important with referrals, and why referrals are much more effective than just someone you pull off of Indeed or ZipRecruiter, is because when someone refers an employee to your organization, they go through this process. They may not do it formally, but they go through a process to figure out, is this person aligned with your business? So in other words, is this person someone who's going to be a fit with your culture? Maybe you have a fun culture and a joking around culture. They're not going to refer a friend who's super serious and stodgy, right? They're going to think that person doesn't fit here. Or your culture might be really fast paced. It might be frenetic. If you think about like logistics and people just trying to get trucks filled and the just frenetic nature of that, right? They're not going to refer someone who's more methodical and takes forever to make a decision and kind of goes through an entire process. They're going to think that person isn't the right fit for the pace of this business, right? Same thing with if it's a fast food, the pace is really fast. So someone who's a little bit slower and just doesn't operate on that warp speed, they're not going to refer them because they know it's not going to be a fit. But when you're getting people off of, just general throw it out to the universe and then they apply, they don't know whether they're a fit or they're not a fit. And so then you've got to do all that sifting and sorting. Whereas with this, they are doing the sifting and the sorting for you. In their entire network of people, they're thinking, who fits here? Culturally, who fits here? Pace-wise, who fits here just with, the general vibe of the office? So those four things are going to make your hires stronger if you give a strong referral bonus. Now, here's one thing. Make those referral bonuses a meaningful amount of money, because we talked about you're spending somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000 in low wage service jobs, right? Just to get a new person. So why are you giving a referral bonus that's $20 or $25 or even $100? you're circumventing a $5,000 process and you're going to give someone $25. That's pound wise, penny foolish, right? That's silly. Make those referral bonuses legit. If you're spending $300 on, Indeed, give that money to that employee and get that higher levels of candidate, because the likelihood that a referral bonus person is going to stick is way higher than your Indeed person. So on an Indeed person, you may go through that process 2 or 3 or 4 times, right? Versus this process where you only go through it once. So maybe give them even more than what you would have spent on that process, knowing you're not going to be repeating it 1 or 2 or 3 more times that year. Make that referral bonus meaningful. Don't cheap out and think, oh, this is just a cost-cutting measure, because it isn't. It is an investment, and it is an investment in your current employee. It is going to up their engagement, and it is going to put pressure on both the person who's been hired as well as the person who referred to make this work. You are going to have an extra trainer, and you are going to find people who are better aligned both culturally and within the pace of your business to work out for you. So that's our super pumped turnover pre-hire recruiting tip: is pay referral bonuses, promote them heavily within your company, and watch the right kind of people start coming through the door. Those are the people that won't be turning over nearly as much as just people off the street. Thanks for joining me today. If you need help with turnover in your business, just click on the website, book a free consultation. We'll talk through some things. And if it sounds like we can help you with that, I would be glad to dive in with you, and let's get down to business. If you've ever dreamed of pressing pause and rediscovering what makes your heart sing, I invite you to follow along on our YouTube channel or on SuperPumped Life on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'll be posting every day, not only a podcast, but updates, stories, bonus coverage, and reflections through this super pumped adventure. If you enjoyed today's show, I would be so grateful if you told your friends about it, and also if you subscribed or followed us so that you don't miss future episodes. If you're one of our awesome audio-only listeners, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube to see the incredible video footage of all that is going on in this 40-day super pumped adventure in the wilderness. Today, I want to talk to you about maybe the thing that has been the most impactful in my businesses, and that is figuring out the why of why someone wants to work for you. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, I already know the why if people want to work for me. People need money. People need a job. You are correct. That is true. But here's the thing. If that's your mindset, you are not differentiating yourself versus your competitors. Today is the third of 3 parts about things to do before someone even gets hired. The first is try to find people within a 10-minute radius of your business. This is particularly if you're working on hourly workers, kind of unskilled workers, that kind of thing. But in general, keep in mind a framework that the more people have to commute, and that cost both in time and money, the more the pay better be. So those better kind of work together. You can ask someone to drive an hour to work if they're making $250,000 a year. You don't ask someone to drive an hour to work if they're making $18 an hour. So keep that in mind. That's the first tip. Second thing is referral bonuses done right are hugely impactful. Those have so much good in them. So if you missed the last episode about referral bonuses, double back and check that out. But today I want to talk to you about maybe the thing that has been the most impactful in my businesses, and that is figuring out the why of why someone wants to work for you. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, I already know the why if people want to work for me. People need money. People need a job. You are correct. That is true. But here's the thing. If that's your mindset, you are not differentiating yourself versus your competitors. Think about it. You need to be better than your competitors if you want to retain the people. If there's an industry average of turnover and you're just doing the same things everybody else does, you're not going to win that battle. There's nothing different about your organization. So when you start figuring out the why of stuff, things start to make sense. The entire package you can build, which will not only help recruit somebody, but also get them kind of invested in your company. And then the key is retain them for years beyond the normal months that those positions turn over. That's where you make the real money. And that's where you make the real impact. So let's unpack this idea of the why. The first thing is, in your interview process, figure out their why. Beyond money, beyond I need a job. I'm going to give you 3 examples of this. I had a woman come in. She was a parent. And so we said, why do you want this job? And she said, well, I need a job. I need money. My husband works, but we have a lot of expenses. And I said, but beyond that, why this job over all the jobs out there? There's a lot of jobs because there's more employers looking for people than there are people looking for them. And so why are you applying for this one? And she said, this was when I owned a commercial cleaning business. She said, my kids are in school. I put them on the bus at like 7:15 and they get off the bus. I think it was around 2:45. And so this particular job was like 8 to 2. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. She said, there's a lot of jobs out there, but a lot of them either require me to go into work before I can get the kids on the bus, or I've got to get off after they're off the bus. And then I've got to figure out, how do I get them home? And do I have them go to a neighbor, or do I ask a friend? And she said it gets complicated. Whereas this job, these hours align perfectly. So right there, we have figured out her why, right? We know what her why is, why she's wanting this job over all the other jobs out there. But here's the secret sauce with that. We then begin to formulate how we craft that position. So let's say normally on our 8 to 2 position, we may ask people, hey, can you stay 2 hours of overtime, right? And that's just part of what we do. And a lot of times there's an implicit assumption on the employer's part that if I ask you to stay 2 hours of overtime and you don't do it, even though it's quote voluntary, that you're somehow a bad employee, or there becomes a pressure among your peers. Like, why does, Tina never work overtime and the rest of us have to work overtime? And so by finding out this why right away, you don't ask Tina to do that because Tina has to get her kids off the bus at 2:30. And not only that, you lay the groundwork with the rest of the team. Like, Tina is going to bust butt for these normal hours, but she's not going to be on the overtime. And then you spin it in such a way that you say, that's one less person competing for those overtime hours. Because a lot of people, if you start looking at hourly workers, a lot of people rely on that overtime bump, those extra 5 or 10 hours a week, depending on what it is, to just give them that little bit extra that helps them make their bills. So Tina is an example of someone, once we knew her why, we knew how to plug her in. And we also knew we were in a unique position where not a lot of employers were offering that 8 to 2 slot because it's not a full 8 hours, but it's not a 4-hour position. And it was also aligned, with school schedules. So we knew with her, we might have to cover some school breaks, that kind of thing. But by knowing this, we could work around it and kind of tailor things. Second example I want to tell you about is a woman, and we asked her, why do you want this job? She said, I need more money. And we're like, well, this was a second job for her. She said, I have a good job, but my son plays D1 basketball and I need a little extra money beyond just my first job, which covers my regular bills, to go see him play. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And she said he plays for a major program. And so, I try to get up to the home games every weekend. So right away we know, okay, she's not available on the weekends, right? Because she wants to see this son play. But the second thing we also knew was this is a very successful program. And so therefore, come March Madness, guess who's not going to be available? She is. Those tournaments start either on Thursday or Friday, depending on your draw, and go through Sunday. So we knew that those 2 or 3 days, for if they went far in the tournament, 3 weekends a year, she wasn't going to be available. We could craft the schedule for that versus if we don't understand the why, and all of a sudden she puts in for 4 days off, 3 straight weekends, and the manager gets their backup and is like, hey, you can't have that amount of time off. That doesn't work for us. And then they get into this kind of conflict and the heads begin to butt. And guess what happens when you start butting heads with your employees? They walk right out the door, right? But by understanding her why, we were able to craft that position. I'll give you a third example. Young person comes to us and has just moved. This is like a 16, 17-year-old. It's the summer before senior year of high school. And this person wants to work in our drive-through fast food establishment. And so we say, why do you want a job? Well, it's the usual teen things. I'd like to get a car and maybe save some money for college. And I said, oh, anything beyond that? And she said, well, I just moved here from Iowa and I actually don't know a lot of people. So I was hoping that if I did a good job here, you guys would serve as a reference. And so I was like, oh, that makes sense. And so then we hired that person. And then in fast food, there can be frustrations and stuff. And so we would say, well, we would joke like, oh, well, just keep doing a good job because you're working for that reference. You're getting that reference. But we also began to formulate, okay, where are you applying to school? And then lo and behold, because we've had a lot of workers her age, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Oh, I'm applying to Ohio State. You know what? We had an employee that was fantastic that went to Ohio State and we connected them. And all of a sudden they're then talking and there's that connection. And all of a sudden they're grateful to their employer for that connection, right? And so because we knew her why, we could help her. Part of what we are trying to do as companies, if you want to make your company stand out, is we want to connect to the human being. These are not robots that we're just plugging in to make widgets, right? We're trying to connect to your human side. The parent that was trying to see her kid play in the NCAA tournament, do you know what we did for that employee? We gave her frequent flyer miles to go see that kid play. Do you know what happens then? Didn't cost us much, but you give that person that opportunity to do the why of why they were working for you. They are going to remain loyal long beyond industry average because you see them as a human being. You see the why in them. Do you remember the parent that had the kids in school and needed to work that 8 to 2? You start then connecting them with other parents within your company who are kids similar ages or maybe a little bit older. And then all of a sudden they've got a friend group and they're trading childcare back and forth. Or maybe even it's hand-me-down clothes, where it's going from this to this to this to this. All of a sudden you're building that social cohesion that goes beyond the employment contract. And when you start doing that, when you start figuring out people's why, and you are a resource for them, you are somebody who helps make their dreams happen, their family tick, they're not going to leave you because some other employer offered them 50 cents more on the dollar. They're going to be loyal to you. They're going to want to continue to work for you because they know they can go see their kid play in an NCAA tournament game, or they can go and make sure they're at the bus stop every morning to put the kids on and every afternoon to get the kids off. Or you're the employer that helped them get into the school they wanted to go to, wrote them a great reference. Do you know who's coming back probably year after year through those college years, or maybe at Christmas break? It's that kid. Because you saw the why and you stepped up and met the need. So if you want to start slaying the turnover dragon, it goes beyond just good hiring practices. Hire people that are close to where they work. Pay people to refer good people to your company. But most importantly, before they ever set foot in the door, figure out their why and figure out how your company can help them achieve their goals. And if you can do that, you are going to keep those people. And guess what? Not only are they going to be happier, you're going to be happier because you're going to be putting way more money back into your pocket. So this is our super pumped moment about turnover and what to do prior to hiring. If you need help with turnover in your business and you want to dig into my toolkit that goes beyond just these 3 things on pre-hiring, hit me up, superpumped.com, book a free consultation. We'll talk through things. If we can help you, we will dig in and we will help you slay the turnover dragon. Thanks for joining me today. If you've ever dreamed of pressing pause and rediscovering what makes your heart sing, I invite you to follow along on our YouTube channel or on Super Pumped Life on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'll be posting every day, not only a podcast, but updates, stories, bonus coverage, and reflections through this Super Pumped adventure. And if you're one of our awesome audio-only listeners, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube to see the incredible video footage of all that is going on in this 40-day Super Pumped adventure in the wilderness. Hey, it's Ben with Super Pumped Podcast. Welcome to the latest installment of our series on reducing turnover in your business so you can make more money, keep your good employees, and keep your great customers. So in this series, there are really 3 parts to reducing turnover and eliminating or reducing that expense. And the first part has to do with recruiting the right people. How you go about this recruiting process is really paramount. In previous podcasts, if you missed them, I talked about the 10-minute rule. I also talked about the critical importance of current employees referring good people to your company. And then I talked about maybe the most important thing on that front end, which is figuring out the why of why someone wants to work for your company. We've gone through that. If you missed any of those, go back and check those out. But today I want to turn the page and talk about onboarding. And this is a point where many companies I see fumble the ball. And the reason I know this is because I've lived it. My own companies have fumbled the ball in this regard. But so often, because we put so much into this process of crafting ads and placing ads and going through interviews and that whole vetting process, that when we finish that, we almost think job over, like we're crossing the finish line. But the reality is, we haven't even started. That person hasn't worked 1 day, 1 minute in your organization. And yet you've already put all this money out there and all this time out there. So you've already invested in them and the process, and you haven't seen 1 iota of ROI. So first thing we need to think about is the recruiting process is just almost getting yourself to the starting line. It's the pre-training and it's going down to the starting line. When I run marathons, I don't get to the starting line and they're throwing a party, right? There's no party at the starting line. Yet so often our HR people, our managers, or even our owner operators, they get to the point where they're ready to hire someone and it's like they're throwing a little party in their head. Not the time to party yet because you're not at the finish line. That's the first thing, is to shift our mindset. So the second part, you've got recruiting, onboarding, and then retaining employees, right? So onboarding, think about that word, on board. This is the critical phase where they go from somebody who has great potential, at least you think they do, and checks the right boxes, or at least most of them, to them being on board, being on the ship, on the plane, on the boat, whatever that is, being an actual productive employee in your company. And this isn't a given, because this is a very difficult dance, employers and employees dance. I often think about it like dating, okay? So a lot of times, if someone catches our eye and we're interested in them in a dating romantic arena, right? There's a vetting process. So we dig to get out, to figure out some information about them. And that could be some online sleuthing. That could be asking other people who know them. Maybe you have common friends or family, and just gathering a little more information that way. And then seeing, is there mutual interest? You may have interest, but they may have no interest, or vice versa. They may be interested in you, but you not in them. So figuring out, is there mutual interest? And if that's the case, then there's this leap you take where you ask somebody, at least in my era, and maybe it's a little different now with some of the younger folks, but you ask for that first date, right? So you haven't hit the finish line just because the initial vetting process seemed promising, right? And there's some interest and some attraction and maybe some commonality, right? You're still at the beginning, at the infancy. As an individual in this dating process, you're still trying to continue to woo that person, to be a part of your life, or at least to explore what that might look like for the two of you to get to know each other better and see where this goes. It's the same thing when we hire new employees. It's a wooing process. It's a mutual discovery. And yet, here's where I see employers starting to fumble the ball. They get to the point where they're ready to do that offer. And they maybe make the offer and the person says, yeah, that sounds good. I think I'd like to at least explore working for your company. And understand the mindset of so many employees is, I'll give it a try, but I'm not overly committed to it. Just like at the early part of dating, you may go on a date and both of you are like, nah, this just wasn't a fit, and wish each other well, hopefully. But in the employer realm, I see so many employers get needy and desperate and demanding at that point. Do you know what happens? They don't close the deal. So think about dating. Like, there's some mutuality. You're ready to ask them on a date. You don't say, okay, let's go out and I'm going to pick you up at 7:00 on Tuesday. So be ready. And we're going to go do this and this and this. Most women, if I tried that, would be like, what? Who are you? You're going to tell me when you're picking me up and what we're going to do and how this is going to go down? You're like, heck no. Wrong. And you'd probably never see them again. And yet employers oftentimes, because they are needy, they're like, okay, we need you to start on Monday. It's going to be from 8 to 5. Go down here and get your drug test. And there's this litany of demands put on a person, right? Now, I saw this in my own company, and here's why. So in my commercial cleaning business, we were scattered over 3 states, multiple counties. It wasn't feasible necessarily to bring everybody into the central office for the interviewing part. In fact, we found it much more productive for the central office to do a lot of the legwork in placing the ads and doing some early screens and maybe some phone screens. But then those in-person interviews we left to the on-site manager. So whatever facility the potential cleaner was working in, they would go and interview with that manager. But what we were finding was we would have what we thought were really good, strong candidates, but then somewhere between making the offer and them starting and sticking, we were losing them. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, what are we doing wrong here? I feel like we're doing everything right. So I dug in and I began to watch and just listen and observe the process from our managers. Everything from the phone call they made to tell them that we wanted to offer them a position, to starting time and all of that. And here's what I learned. The managers who'd been holding the bag, let's say a manager had a crew of 12 people and they were down 3 because of turnover, right? So they're down 3 people, which means they're riding their other 9 really hard and they're probably getting some blowback from those folks. And the manager is probably picking up the slack on that, right? So they're at a bit of a breaking point, right? So what does the manager want to do? The manager wants to fill that position as soon as possible. So they would come at it when it was like they had a potential new hire right there in the cradle of their hands, but then they would mess it up. There's a great scene in the movie Tommy Boy. For those of you who have seen it, it's Chris Farley and David Spade. And they are tasked with going out and selling Callahan brake pads. And they are just getting their butts kicked out on the road. Every door and every meeting they go into, it is no. As that happens, they begin to get more desperate and more cuckoo and more just off the chains. There's a scene in a diner where David Spade, he's holding a roll and this is my sale. And then I get so excited that I'm just overexcited and I start trying way too hard and doing too many things. And then next thing I know, I kill my sale because I'm putting all these demands on things. I'm just so wound tight on the whole thing, desperate, demanding, needy. In the end, he gets the woman. In this particular case, he's trying to get her to fire up the fryer after they've had another long day of hearing no on the sales street. And David Spade says, that's interesting. Why don't you sell like that out there? Be real, but also be engaging. And this light goes off that, man, the more needy and demanding you are, the more you're going to kill your sale. It's the same thing with onboarding. If you're needy and demanding and you need them right now because you're 3 people down and what are you going to do? You're tired of working that. Who wants to work there? Already, you're starting to stress them out. This potential hire, right? They're like, yeah, this place sounds kind of rough. I don't want to be, okay, I go there and I'm the 10th person, but now we're still right off the bat. I don't know what I'm doing and I'm having to cover somebody else. That stresses me. I don't want to do that. Guess what? Either they don't show up at all, they just ghost you, which is pretty common, or they show up for a couple of nights and because you're so needy and demanding, they don't come back. That's what I found our managers were doing. They were dumping all of their anxiousness and frustration on that potential new hire even before they were onboarded. So we began to change that. We began to think of it more as a wooing process. So instead of, here's when you need to start, blah, 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 we would offer them the position and then say, when would work best for you? Now, in our head, we're thinking, we need to get this thing filled as soon as possible. But if it was the right candidate, I would rather wait 2 weeks than start over from the get-go on the whole recruiting process and find another qualified candidate, because that whole process is both costly and time-consuming, right? So if you have to wait a couple weeks, that's okay. And oftentimes, let's be honest, the person who's looking for that job, some of them say, you know what they say? We got to give 2 weeks notice to our current employer. That's a good employee. They're not leaving their current employer high and dry, right? That's the person you have a lot of respect for that has a lot of integrity. Or maybe they need to work out childcare, or maybe they need to figure out their transportation piece of things. Even something as simple as just give me a couple days to figure out the bus lines and where I transfer and how I get there. Something seemingly simple like that, and giving them the time can make all the difference, because you still come across as charming and you're not acting desperate. You're not acting like putting high pressure, high stress on them, right? You're working at their speed. You're continuing to woo them. You're continuing to value them above you. And that's an important thing. Now, the flip side can also occur where, let's say you have a candidate that you really want to hire and they've been out of work for a time and they need money and they need it bad. Maybe you're thinking it's a Tuesday and you'll just start them the following Monday, but you say, when would work for you? And they say, I'm ready anytime. And sure, it might work better for you to start them the following Monday. It gives you a little more lead time on training and trainers and curriculum and all that. But what if you pep that up? What if you move your timetable up to meet their timetable? What if you say, you know what? Let me make a couple phone calls this afternoon, but I think I can start you tomorrow. And then you call them back and you say, hey, I get it. We all need to make money. I get that you've been out of work for a little spell here. We can start you tomorrow. What does that say to that employee? It says, I hear you. I hear your position in life, your personal need, and I'm working with you. How much of a difference does that make? Going back to this dating analogy, right? If you're interested in someone and you say, would you like to go out sometime? And you don't tell them you're going to go out this time on this day with me and we're going to do this activity. And then you start talking through like, oh, when would work for you? And they may say, I'm a student and I have class these nights, so maybe this time, but I'm out of town to go somewhere, whatever. And you make it work for whatever works for them. You know what? you put that relationship off on the right foot. But on the other hand, if they're all gung-ho, my wife and I, we met on an airplane and we went out the next day. That worked for us. Now, it was because I was leaving Boston in 5 days, so there was no time to wait. But that interest was there, that we were both raring to go on this thing. So figure out what works mutually for the both of you. Because if you don't, you're going to kill this hiring process before you even get them on board. You have to think that this process of slaying the turnover dragon, it is critically important that you get them on board. Because if you do all the work, the pre-work of reference checks and ads and interviews and vetting and all that, and you don't even get them to the point of coming on board with you, that's all just cost that is escalated, that is eating into your bottom line, and that isn't doing you any good. So this is our Super Pumped podcast today on turnover, how you can reduce it, how you can get these folks on your team, on board, whatever train you're headed down, and make sure that they're an important part of your group. It really is a process. It's a process of really building trust, of having the ability for the employee and the employer to trust one another, to work together, and to begin to form this incredible friendship. And when you think about it as a starting line, when you think about it that this is the beginning, this could last for many years. And so we've talked about Tommy Boy, but I want to leave you with a quote from the movie Casablanca. In Casablanca, they say, and it's the famous line, "This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship." As you think about onboarding your employees, think about the fact this could be the beginning of a very long-term relationship with that employee who is incredibly productive, incredibly loyal, and incredibly lucrative for your company. Thanks for joining me today. I'm super pumped you did, and I will see you next time. Along this journey, I'm not just seeking adventure and renewal. I'm carving out space we so often don't have, to think about and to ponder and to meditate and to pray on life's bigger questions. What is the meaning of life? Where does God exist? Does God exist? How do I fit into the cosmos? What is my purpose? These things that so often we just can't even take the time to put the mental energy into. I have 40 days to dig into that. And along the way, I hope I can muster the courage to be vulnerable, to share some of those struggles that I'll be going through, and also some of the cool discoveries and thoughts and adventures that come my way. I would be so grateful if you told your friends about it, and also if you subscribed or followed us so that you don't miss future episodes. If you're one of our awesome audio-only listeners, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube to see the incredible video footage of all that is going on in this 40-day super pumped adventure in the wilderness. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you tomorrow.